Yes, Australia exports camels to Saudi Arabia. Camels did not evolve in Australia, but turns out they really love it there, to the point where they're actually an invasive species. So how did camels become an invasive species in Australia? Why are they imported by countries like Saudi Arabia where they're actually native? And while we're at it, what can this tell us about the history of camels in general, both evolutionarily and within human civilization? Camels are of course not native to Australia, but they're also not native to Africa. In fact, while they've lived in Central and Southwest Asia for millions of years, the ancestors of camels actually evolved in North America, with the family Camelidae first showing up around 50 million years ago with this deer-looking thing called Protolopus. Around 16 million years ago, the tribes of Camelini and Lamini would split from each other, and each group would eventually leave North America through separate land bridges. Members of Lamini would cross into South America to become llamas and alpacas, while Camelini went northwest across the Bering Strait to become camels. Then sea levels rose and North American camelids went extinct, along with a bunch of other really cool Ice Age animals. From there, the genus Camelus split into 3 species: the dromedary with 1 hump, the Bactrian camel with 2 humps, and the endangered wild Bactrian camel. Each adapted to brave the deserts that no one else could settle. The Bactrian camel was domesticated sometime in the 4th millennium BC, either here in northwestern Mongolia or here in the Köpüdağ Mountains in Turkmenistan, while the dromedary was domesticated much later. In a video I made a few months ago, I mentioned that the Sahara used to be much wetter and greener than it is today, up until as recently as the Bronze Age. Actually, this was also true with Arabia, which also began to dry up at around the same time. Not all of Arabia is a desert. In fact, you can find some incredibly lush areas in western Saudi Arabia and Yemen, where ancient agricultural communities set up terraced farms, like those you see in East and Southeast Asia or in Central America. The real challenge for these peoples was in connecting these communities across the desert, for which the local dromedary was domesticated sometime between 1800 and 1100 BC. For those of you keeping track of the dates, that does in fact mean that Egypt did not have domestic camels for most of what we think of as ancient Egypt. Camels do occasionally appear in artwork from older eras, but they were simply never used domestically until the late period. It makes sense though, since camels are most useful for going long distances across the desert, but Egypt already has the Nile for that, and whenever they did expand beyond the Nile Valley, it was usually not far from the sea. Camels are also used for their meat, milk, skin, manure, and fat, but again, Egypt already had cows and oxen. In fact, there was no Egyptian word for camel. There is a word for camel in Coptic, which is a descendant of the Egyptian language, but that word comes from a later Semitic root. Which makes sense, since domestic camels were first introduced to Egypt in the 7th and 6th centuries BC by the Assyrian and later Persian Achaemenid empires, using these beasts of burden to help connect Egypt to the rest of their empires. Camels actually seem to have disappeared from North Africa a few thousand years earlier, but the Assyrians were the ones to introduce domestic camels into the area. The practice of domesticating camels made its way further west in Africa, being used by the Berbers or Amazigh of the Sahara, and eventually reaching the Ghana Empire in modern-day, actually not Ghana. While trade and travel across the Sahara did happen earlier, using camels instead of horses allowed more regular travel across the desert, turning irregular pathways into arteries connected to a West African heart. Is that too poetic? From the trans-Saharan trade to the Silk Road in Central Asia, camels did to the desert what sailing ships did with the oceans, connecting civilizations from Rome to China, and building new centers of civilization in places people once feared to travel. Throughout the 19th century, just as gold rushes were underway in California and the Yukon, so too did one begin in Australia. Or actually, multiple gold rushes all across the country. It is a big country, after all. But many of these gold deposits were deep inland, in places like the Great Dividing Range or all over Western Australia, while colonial Australian cities generally like to stick closer to the coast. So, you had a commodity that needed to be transported en masse across vast arid sandy deserts that horses and oxen would struggle in, and your empire also happens to hold places like India and parts of Arabia. And so, 10 to 20,000 camels were shipped out of India and introduced to South Australia, as well as a large number of camel drivers, since taking care of camels is not the same thing as taking care of horses. These cameleers were mainly people from Afghanistan, becoming known down under as Gans. Around the same time, the US also imported camels as an experiment for the army, though they didn't import nearly as many as Australia did, and camels did not become a problem in Arizona like they would in Australia. Does it count as foreshadowing when I'm literally right about to talk about it? Then came two new innovations, trains and trucks, making camels basically obsolete, and so the camels were all set free. These camels came to love the Australian outback, a little too much, as over 300,000 of them now roam around a habitat that never evolved to handle them. Camels compete with other animals for plants, drink water holes dry, knock over fences, including that one really long fence used to keep dingoes out of the southeast, so the sheep aren't very happy about it, can spread very quickly for literally the same reasons humans first domesticated them, and they can double their population every 8 years. So chances are, if you're watching this in 2034, the Australian government has been trying to reduce this feral camel population, usually by culling them, but this has proven to be expensive and also not very popular. Plus, they already tried that with the emus and the internet won't stop reminding them about it. So if you can't get rid of them, use them. Thus, Australia has found itself in the perhaps unexpected position of exporting camels to countries like the Gulf nations, Egypt, Jordan, and many others like Malaysia and Brunei. These aren't consistent yearly exports per se. It's not that Australia is exporting a set amount of camels every year to these countries like it would with a normal export good. I mean, if they're not careful, that could be a Cobra effect waiting to happen. But this all begs the question, why do these countries feel the need to import camels from Australia? Despite what I said earlier about trucks and trains making camels obsolete, camel caravans are still regularly used to this day. I mean, how do you think I got this stock footage? Many of these camels are used for tourism, like those camels you see everyone riding in front of the pyramids of Giza, but in many places they are still useful for carrying cargo. Camels, especially strong, healthy camels from Australia, are also sought out for their meat and milk, or for use as racing camels. And as the only wild, or actually feral, group of dromedaries in the modern world, Australian camels also tend to have a lot more genetic diversity than domestic Afro-Asian camels, as the result of being a mixed population. Saudi Arabia in particular has actually imported camels from other countries for a long time, since there's a high demand for them and their products, even as their own camel population decreased, with more and more of the Bedouin population giving up their traditional nomadic lifestyles. Interestingly, if you rank countries by their camel population, Australia isn't even in the top 10. Some countries you do see in the top 10 though are Chad, Somalia, Sudan, and Niger, each of whom have various conflicts going on within their borders, leaving customers like the Saudis to look for other sources, like the healthy and genetically diverse camels that Australia wants to get rid of. So, I don't know, I guess the moral of the story is, no matter how bad your problems get, someone will probably pay you for them.